just want to say that Senator Westrom moves Senate File 4495, recommend to pass and re-referred, from what I hear, to the Senate Finance Committee. Now, apparently it goes to the rules automatically. Is that right, Joel? Okay. And then it'll go to the Finance Committee.
That is correct.
Wonderful. Wonderful. All right. With that, Senator Westrom.
Mr. Chair, members wanting to move along here with the full agenda. This Senate File 4495, excuse me, is a housing tenant and housing providers aid package, and a bill that's something we've been discussing for several weeks with the House, and in response to COVID-19 and some of the urgencies that are being created both for renters, tenants.
Say, Senator Westrom, I think we may have lost you there.
This happened in the town hall too.
Keeping their mortgage paid, or maybe they have a contract for deed and they're in jeopardy of foreclosure. This bill would try to address many of those situations temporarily with a end date and a time.
Say, Senator Westrom, can you hear me okay?
Propose $30 million to be.
Senator Westrom, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Yes. Say, it's coming in and out. I don't know if you're getting some pop-ups over on your end that's maybe muting it for a moment, but it kind of comes in and out a little bit. I don't know if there's something on your end that you can do, but just want to make you aware of that.
Okay, let me just, don't know what's, is that better, Mr. Chair?
I can hear you now. Yep.
Okay. I'll maybe try to talk slower, but feel free to let me know if it's sporadic again, and I'll try to do my best. But members, where I was at, this bill would propose $30 million to be quickly out the door to address any of the rental situations or mortgage situations that homeowners or renters and property owners would find themselves in a scenario. It would also codify the governor's 60-day or eviction moratorium. He's currently has a 30-day moratorium. This would establish a 60-day eviction moratorium for most all evictions across the state relating to tenancy. And it would also apply to foreclosures and stop them for 60 days. And it would give the governor an additional 30 days of extension for up to 30 days for an eviction moratorium if the situation later in May has not improved, or things have not started to reopen, or there's a need for that. That again would be targeted towards essentially all evictions across the state, with an exception of some criminal activity or nuisances or damage to property, which is the narrow carve out that is in the governor's order. But it would apply to everybody, whether they're affected by COVID-19 or not, both in either an illness or in job loss. That's not a condition or a precursor to who's covered under the eviction moratorium. It does what the governor's current one does, which is quite broad to everyone across the state, essentially. The $30 million would be targeted towards those, however, who have been affected by COVID-19 or the coronavirus. Those that have been affected either by illness in themselves or in their family, or affected in loss of
We lost you again, Senator Westrom.
would qualify, and to those that are under 300% of poverty guidelines. For a single person, that's about $38,000, we're told. For a family, that would be much higher. But those would be the people that we would get this aid out and also establish a 90-day or a 60-day with up to a 30-day extension of an eviction moratorium. So there's also that certainty and end date for those affected by that moratorium and the situations that can't get resolved otherwise, or alternatively, that 90-day moratorium up to 90-day would be in effect. And so, members, this represents language that the Senate, Senator Weber and myself, while there were many negotiations going on with emergency and urgent type programs or dollars or policy change to address some of the pandemic issues, this language reflects where we had gotten to an agreement with the House, Representative Hausman, back on about April 6th. And we want to pursue this and try to get this completed sooner rather than later. Senator Dietzick was also on several of those calls as we were working through this, largely language that was given back to us by the House and the governor's office as we were working through these issues, trying to find both a balance with the dollar amount that we could afford and that could be helpful. The governor initially had started at $10 million to refresh your memories. Some have asked for as much as $100 million. $30 million is an amount that we think is very reasonable, a very good start. And we all recognize in a month or several weeks down the road, we may have to be re-looking at some of these issues, as we do with many other aspects of our state budget and issues that have come to light. So we think this is important to get moving forward with, follow through on what we had spent many hours in compromising and trying to negotiate a end date of certainty for some, money out the door for others. And this would be a big help to pass and get signed into law. Lastly, members, this language also does apply to foreclosures, and that is a language that the governor's executive order does not yet cover, as I understand. They are urging banks to not foreclose, but their language doesn't have a moratorium on foreclosures. This language would, if we pass it as we had agreed once with the House, Representative Hausman and the governor's staff and Commissioner Ho from MHFA were all part of those discussions that we had on April 6th. And we think it's a very good compromise and a good bill to get out the door so we can get aid to those and relief to those that might be in need, as well as have the legislature involved in some of these decisions of changing statutes, which many are concerned that the governor alone doesn't have the ability to change statutes, as we've heard over different times from Senate Council and others. And if you look at the emergency powers, the legislature does need to be involved in this, and that's why it's important we have this hearing and move this bill, reflecting broad agreement from many and an important issue to help take care of those that are affected by COVID-19. With that, Mr. Chair, I think we could open it up for testimony.
Well, thank you, Senator Westrom. Appreciate that. Yeah, I think we can hold questions until we've got quite a list of testifiers on there. So if we could, Commissioner Ho, would you please begin your testimony?
Great. Chair Johnson, Chair Westrom, and members of the committee, my name is Jennifer Ho, and I am the Commissioner of Minnesota Housing. This is my home office. I just want you to know, Senator Westrom, I put on a suit for you today. It's the first suit I've had on in about 41 days, so just want to make sure you know that I dressed up for you today.
You wouldn't have had to do that. Thank you.
I'm joined today from their own homes by Ryan Baumfrog, my Assistant Commissioner for Policy and Community Development, and Lael Robertson. She's our policy attorney who is covering for Dan Kitzberger while he's out on paternity leave. I just want folks to know that during this pandemic, Dan and his wife had a healthy baby girl on April 10th. We're very excited about that. First of all, thank you for all that all of you are doing for the people of Minnesota during these extraordinary and unprecedented times. I applaud your finding a way to conduct open hearings, and thank you for hosting this hearing on matters that are urgent and growing all across the state to help people stay at home. I want to use the time I have to go over three things. First, what Minnesota Housing has done since the outbreak of COVID-19. Second, what we're seeing, and then finally, what we think is needed. So first, what we've done. Between March 13th and in the week that followed, we transitioned the vast majority of our staff to telework. We executed that with incredible speed, and it's a tribute to my whole team that we now barely have anyone going into the office at all, and when they must, it is for as brief a time as possible. And yet Minnesota Housing continues to be fully operational, with the exception of limiting on-site inspections and of course group events. We've opened our annual consolidated RFP with an extended due date. We're still closing on multifamily deals, and families are still getting home mortgages. We are in close contact with many of our partners daily. At the same time, we started doing emergency response, especially as it relates to people experiencing homelessness, but also in partnership with multifamily, supportive housing, and public housing providers, recognizing that there are large numbers of people at high risk of serious complications if they get COVID-19. We make sure they're getting the information that they need, and that the Minnesota Department of Health and the State Emergency Operations Center are anticipating their needs. We began work immediately with the Attorney General and the Governor's Office on the executive order that suspended evictions, which the Governor signed on March 23rd. The Governor's message has been clear. It is in the interest of the whole state's public health that people be able to stay at home while that executive order is in place. At the same time, the Governor has stressed that Minnesotans should pay their rent or their mortgage if they can, and to work closely with their landlord or their financial institution if they can't. Federal protections have been put in place for people with federally backed mortgages, and the federal government has encouraged public housing agencies and others to do the right thing during this pandemic. The governor's eviction executive order provides these protections to all Minnesotans, with a few exceptions for safety. So next, what we're seeing. You all know we had a significant housing crisis before the pandemic hit Minnesota. We had nearly 140,000 households that made less than $50,000 and were paying more than 50% of their income on rent. Shelters were full, and the number of people living outside was growing at an alarming rate. Now we have over 500,000 Minnesotans that have filed for unemployment, and rent is due again next Friday. We're tracking all the federal actions and the CARES Act funding to anticipate how that provides relief to renters, homeowners, landlords, and financial institutions. But so far, housing has not been a significant part of federal action. We're working closely with our partner agencies, including the Department of Employment and Economic Development and the Department of Human Services, to use those resources in ways the state never has before for housing. We continue to push at the federal level for more housing assistance. We're tracking non-payment across our own portfolio and across the country. Minnesotans are generally ahead of the country in making payments in April, but I'm hearing from landlords across the state that collected between 5 to 25% less in rent payments in the month of April. And we know that homeless providers are frantically scrambling to deconcentrate shelters, implement social distancing, procure additional space, and create protection, isolation, and quarantine spaces for people who are already using shelter, as well as those who are living outside. We're also monitoring the capital markets and tax credit pricing to understand what housing development may look like moving forward. Our family homeless prevention and assistance grantees are seeing increased demand on a program that was already only serving about 1 in 10 households who needed it. And we're all bracing for May. So quick action is needed. We need to get housing assistance to landlords starting in May, which is why I urge the Senate to take action quickly so that families and landlords know that some level of state resources will be available to help pay upcoming bills. As you'll hear today, there is an unprecedented coalition of landlords, tenant advocates, housing providers, and advocacy groups who are supporting more funding for the Family Homeless Prevention and Assistance Program. We need more than $30 million for the Family Homeless Prevention and Assistance Program to address the urgent and growing needs, but $30 million would be a good start. One concern I have relates to the end date for the suspension of evictions and writ of recovery. While an end date is important and will help housing providers plan next steps, I'm concerned that an end date that is too soon will put housing stability at risk for thousands of households while the pandemic is still occurring. We also need to make sure we have the ability to protect public health after the legislative session is over on May 18th. Stakeholders agree that we need an end date and we need flexibility moving forward. I appreciate the administrative flexibility in this language that will help us implement the new program. My staff and I will continue to be available to work with the committee and staff as the bill moves forward to make sure the program isn't overly burdensome for families to access and overly difficult for local entities to administer. This bill meets an immediate need and a right now plan to help homeless service providers and those they serve who are seeing an unprecedented demand for homeless prevention resources. The majority of providers are out of resources by the second week of the month, and landlords are not able to get the assistance they need to pay their bills. Supporting landlords is supporting small businesses. We also need a long-term strategy that includes a robust bonding bill, so we can let the developer community know there will be housing infrastructure bonds, and we can let public housing authorities know that there will be public housing preservation bonds. We need to recognize that housing investments are stimulus to get the economy back as quickly as we can once it is safe to do so. Resources in the bonding bill are the agency's #1 source of capital from the state. With a few changes, this bill could be a win-win situation. It could stabilize families during this difficult time, provide the resources landlords need to pay their bills, and provide the flexibility needed to address the evolving public health need. Thank you for your attention to this urgent matter and for all that you are doing. Senator Johnson, Senator Westrom, all of you, it's good to see you, and I look forward to working with you and others to get a bill over the finish line. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Commissioner. You will be around through the hearing today, is that correct?
That's correct, and Ryan and Lael are also available if you've got some questions for us. So I'll be watching all the way through.
Well, in that case, we won't take any questions right now. Still, we'll continue on our agenda. Let's see.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Cecil Smith, if you're on, there you are. You have the floor. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair Johnson and Chair Westrom and members of the committee. My name is Cecil Smith. I am President and CEO of the Minnesota Multi-Housing Association. MHA is made up of 1,800 members, representing more than 400,000 units of housing in the state. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today on Senate File 4495. My comments today are less direct to the bill itself and more to what I believe a COVID-19 housing bill should seek to accomplish for our residents. The conversations around COVID-19 rental assistance have been ongoing for just over a month, but without any conclusion. If the current situation continues, one absent any assistance or certainty, this could put our residents at serious financial risk and so would destabilize the housing market. This is why we are asking for rent payment support and policy certainty, such as timelines and processes. Earlier this week, Matthew Desmond, who operates the Princeton Eviction Lab, highlighted that, quote, though Minnesota has some of the strongest protections in place, without action on rental debt, Minnesota could still see a surge of evictions soon after the state of emergency expires, end quote. Further to Mr. Desmond's point, we need to consider how to off-ramp the eviction moratorium so that evictions can be done in an orderly way and not overwhelm the courts. But to best avoid that, the imperative must be significant rental assistance. In conclusion, I urge legislators and those specifically negotiating on the COVID-19 housing bill to focus on funding rental assistance and a planned eviction off-ramp. If these two items are addressed, we can improve the situation and position Minnesota better than most other states to serve our residents at the end of this crisis. Thank you, Chair Johnson and Chair Westrom and members of the committee for the opportunity to testify.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Smith. Appreciate that. We'll move on to Mr. Alan Arthur.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the time today. Chairman Johnson, Chairman Westrom, committee members, I am Alan Arthur, and I am the president and CEO of AON. We are a Minnesota nonprofit organization that produces, preserves, owns, and operates 5,586 affordable apartment homes for 12,000 people throughout the Twin Cities. AON's purpose is a simple one: to make home possible for families who wouldn't otherwise have that opportunity. Thank you again for your time today. Before we were hit with COVID-19, there seemed to be a broad bipartisan agreement that the legislature should address the critical needs of affordable housing in our state. I recognize that you and your compadres face a very, very challenging crisis on many fronts. Affordable housing is one of those fronts. Affordable housing was in crisis, as Commissioner Ho said, before the pandemic. For many years, Minnesota has been losing affordable homes faster than we've been building them. It's why AON has been working hard in the past 5 years to preserve 3,000 affordable apartment homes before they were lost to the marketplace. Last year, I stated in a Star Tribune interview that decades of converging economic, market, social, and policy trends were pushing us towards 20 years of the worst housing situation since the Great Depression in the 1930s. That seemed alarmist to some people at the time, but unfortunately, it is now almost a given. That was the situation before COVID-19. Now the problem we face is worse, much worse. COVID-19 related job losses have hit especially hard on families and individuals at the lower end of the economic ladder. Families who are already paying more than 50% of their meager income are now set up to be economically evicted at some point, no matter how long the eviction moratorium lasts. I emphasize, no matter how long an eviction moratorium lasts, without the kind of rental support that you consider today, the wave of economic evictions will be massive. Rent revenues for various owners in April typically range from 5% to 30% lower than March collections. Most of us expect the problem to increase, perhaps double in May and June. At AON, at our place, it looks like we will end April down about 10%, mostly because our residents have been scrambling, and in just the past few days, many have been using the money they would normally use for May rent to finally pay their April rent. Of course, that means they won't have it available for May. These families typically rely on the very low wages they get from cleaning our buildings after we go home at night from their service wage jobs, or should I say from the service wage jobs they had a few weeks ago. Unpaid rents not only damage residents, but seriously damages the ability for owners to operate the properties, as Mr. Smith said, in a decent way. It makes it impossible to keep the property going, to pay taxes, make the mortgage loan payments. Many affordable properties across the state will go into technical foreclosure. Our new economic realities put greater and greater pressure on those of us who operate affordable housing, and of course, is absolutely crushing the families and individuals who live in our apartment homes. So there was a powerful case for this bill before COVID-19 and the economic fallout. The rental assistance at a significant rate the significant scale that's represented in this bill is even more critical now to ensure the vitality of our affordable housing sector when we need it most. Significant rental assistance from you can put a big dent in the problem to not only help keep people in their homes, but help ensure that the affordable housing that you have created and have helped create and support over the years stays viable, stays decent and safe assets in the communities that you represent. So from Hibbing to Hendricks, from Roseau to Rochester, our state will see a doubling of homelessness. The rental support in this bill, and frankly, I hope 30 million, 50 million, 100 million, but a significant amount of rent support for families and individuals in your communities can help homelessness from tripling or worse. Your support at this critical moment can help make the difference. Thank you, Chairman Johnson, Chairman Westrom, members of the committee. Thank you so much to each of you for your work and your leadership. You know, we all do realize the difficulty that you have, the difficulty of the job you have. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Arthur. Appreciate the testimony today. So up next is Mr. Mark Bruner. If you can unmute and begin your testimony. Let's see, Mark, I still got you on mute. Joel, is there any way to get Mark off mute from our end?
Yeah, I'll be trying to unmute him here.
I'm still seeing a mute on Mark's, Mr. Bruner's.
Joel?
Are we now?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, there we go.
Okay, thanks. Mark Bruner, Manufactured Modular Home Association of Minnesota. We appreciate the opportunity to comment on the bill. I'd like to thank Senator Westrom for bringing the bill and for specifically including residents of manufactured home communities for qualifying for both eviction protection and emergency housing assistance during the pandemic. The MMHA represents the owners of manufactured home communities in Minnesota. There are nearly 1,000 privately owned communities where approximately 50,000 families reside, and they account for nearly 25% of all owner-occupied units considered affordable for Minnesota families earning less than half the area's median income. We also represent factory builders of manufactured homes and modular homes, the model home sales centers, lenders, and developers. We do appreciate the bill's provision referencing current statutes to protect the security of residents and our community employees from violation of law or where someone is endangering the safety of other residents or community personnel, so that appropriate actions can be taken against such individuals. While our manufactured home community members witnessed a slight increase in delinquencies for April, and for those situations, they did work with their residents to come up with a long-term solution. We do anticipate an increase in non-payment of rent heading into May and June. And we hope the legislature can reach an agreement on pandemic assistance for renters. And we look forward to working and being a part of that conversation. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Bruner. Appreciate your testimony. With that, let's move on to Mr. Warren Hansen. I saw he was on. I've lost, there I see you. If you could unmute and begin your testimony.
Thank you, Chair Johnson and Chair Westrom. My name is Warren Hansen. I am the President and CEO of Greater Minnesota Housing Fund. And we have financed over 16,000 units of affordable homes and provided over $250 million in charitable loans, grants, and investments in affordable housing statewide. That's, I guess, an indicator of the fact that we're a very strong partner and a committed partner with the state, in particular Minnesota Housing, in the production and preservation of affordable housing, and are committed to doing everything we can to respond to the COVID-19 threat to families whose homes and health are at risk. We continue to make about $60 million a year available in 2020 to keep up production. And now we're recalibrating and retooling, much like the commissioner pointed out, to keep our existing housing safe and stable during the pandemic, which is the subject of this bill. I want to thank you for the investments that are proposed in the bill today. It will be an important tool with the resources that you will provide. There's an existing mechanism for the deployment of this fund, and we know that it has a proven track record of keeping families and individuals stably housed and preventing displacement. On behalf of Greater Minnesota Housing Fund and really everybody working on affordable housing in Greater Minnesota in particular, I want to urge the committee to consider investing more than $30 million. We have evidence that I'll share with you right now of a much greater need. Greater Minnesota Housing Fund has collected data from property owners that shows the depth of the impact of COVID-19 on Minnesota renter households through an extensive survey we just completed of rental property owners and managers. We surveyed 31,000 housing units in rural and urban parts of the state to determine the rate of the tenant inability to pay April rent due to COVID-19 pandemic impacts. And this was primarily focused on the affordable housing providers. So the findings suggest a very dramatic increase in the inability of tenants to pay rent, as we've heard before by the previous speakers. The specific findings we have are that rental income declined by an average of 16% in April compared to March. And this rate of decline represents an estimated $41 million to $60 million loss of rental income statewide for April. Now, it's not all about the property owners, as Cecil Smith and Alan Arthur and the commissioner mentioned. That $41 to $60 million of rent loss is an indicator, a dollar for dollar, a comparable amount of money that's needed for rental assistance over the next several months to help tenants pay the rent that they are going to be unable to pay. And in addition to that, COVID-19 has increased the operating costs for rental properties due to a higher need for cleaning and sanitation and staffing, on top of which rental income has declined. So expenses have gone up and income has gone down, and that really threatens the existing rental housing stock and the stability of our stock. And again, the inability to pay rent will soon result in high risk of eviction and homelessness for Minnesota renters. And essentially today's tenants who cannot pay rent are tomorrow's homeless families and individuals. And I would just close by saying that major new state resources are needed to deliver this rental assistance that tenants need throughout the state. And we would urge the committee to consider an amount higher than 30 million, something closer to the 100 million that was recommended by others. And I'll close there and just say thank you very much for putting this bill forward, and thanks in advance for the support for rental assistance.
Well, thank you, Warren, for your testimony. Appreciate that. And next, we've got Kevin Dunleavy, real estate attorney. Kevin, if you could unmute and give me a signal that you're on here. I don't see you at the moment. There you are. So Kevin, begin whenever you are ready to go.
Okay, I'm unmuted. I haven't appeared before this committee before. I'm usually at Senate Judiciary. I'm the co-chair of the legislative committee of the real property section of the Bar Association. So I do Bar Association work at the legislature.
Well, it's good to have you here. We've got a couple of attorneys on. We've got a couple of attorneys on this committee, and it's pretty rare to have a fellow attorney. So thank you for coming. Appreciate it.
Mr. Chair, most of my comments are technical, and I'm happy to work with Senate counsel. First I have a couple of questions and then a couple of suggestions. So regarding section 1 of the bill, line 1.13 talks about termination of residential leases, but the language itself is pretty broad. And so I'm wondering if it also includes agricultural leases and commercial leases. Just that one clause talks about residential leases. That's a policy decision for the legislature. As far as ag leases, most of those get paid in the fall after the crops come in. So there's probably not. I don't think there's a lot of evictions on ag property this time of year, but maybe. With commercial leases, there's going to be a bunch of those because there are a lot of retail, office buildings, restaurants, and those types of businesses that are they're going to be unable to pay their rents before long. And then residential, obviously, this is a concern about residential leases. Those are the 3 types of leases, though. And I just want to make sure, are we talking about all 3 or are we just talking about residential? Line 1.21 talks about charging late fees, but then line 210 through 212 say that nothing changes the terms of the lease. So those 2 provisions may be contradictory. There may be, I don't know, I don't have a suggestion how to fix that, but late fees are usually in the lease. But line 212 says there's no changes in the terms of the lease. So one of those has got to give a little bit. Down to section 4 on the foreclosures. Okay, there is line 3.8. There isn't technically an action with a non-judicial foreclosure or a foreclosure by advertisement under 580. So my suggestion for line 3.8 is that it say Minnesota Statutes Chapter 581. Then there's a question about, okay, there are lots of different types of residential property. And with the mortgage foreclosure crisis back in 2008, most of the foreclosure language, it was limited to 1 to 4 family owner-occupied dwellings. So is that what we're talking about here? Are we just talking about owner-occupied residences or single-family dwellings that are also have tenants? Or are we talking about apartment buildings? Back in 1980, 1985, 1990, there was another foreclosure crisis, and that dealt with commercial property mostly. And most of what I did was not evicting, but foreclosing on multifamily dwellings. And in some of those cases, the tenants were better off when the lenders took over because the landlords were just taking the rent. They weren't paying the mortgage. They weren't paying the upkeep of the property. So somebody has to make a policy decision. Are we talking about single family residential? Are we talking about multifamily residential? Are we talking about 1 to 4 family owner occupied residential for this stay? Same thing with ag property. Is ag property included? And then also, what about other commercial property like a shopping mall or a grocery store or something like that? Is that something that the stay should be applied to? Line 3.9 talks about the mortgage being on a residence, but the language in front of it is real broad about any foreclosure. So which is it? Is it just residential or is it also ag, commercial, multifamily? Okay, so then next question is, someone probably knows this, but I don't. Line 310 talks about if the property is located within a jurisdiction where the public emergency has been called. How do you determine that? Is that the whole state or is it just parts of the state? If it's the whole state, it should say so. Then we don't have to think about it. Okay, that's all I got. Thank you for your time.
Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Dunleavy. Do you have those questions in a format that can be emailed either to our committee administrator or Greg Knopf or others that we can go through, or maybe you've had these communications prior to our meeting today?
I've got notes, and the Bar Association lobbyist has had contact with, I don't know exactly who, but I'm happy to work directly with Senate Council or anybody. My notes are just my scribbles, but I can clean it up and put it in more like bill drafting format.
If you wouldn't mind at least bringing those concerns up and emailing them out so that we have those in a hard copy on hand, I would greatly appreciate that.
Who should I send it to?
Joel Hanson, our committee administrator.
Hanson, okay.
Joel, joel.hanson@senate.mn.
Could you repeat it again, slower?
Sure. Joel, JOEL, .Hanson, HANSON, @senate.mn would be my email.
Okay,
Appreciate it. Thank you.
very good.
Wonderful. Thank you for those questions.
You're welcome.
John Levy. With that, if you wrapped up, let's move on to Miss Kristen Rosenberger. Kristen, are you on? There you are.
Can you see me? Yeah.
I can hear you good. Go
Wonderful.
ahead.
Thank you so much. Well, good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and committee members. My name is Kristen Rosenberger, and I'm the Senior Advocacy Manager at Greater Twin Cities United Way. If you're following along on the agenda, I think you'll note that our Senior Vice President, Akua Ellis, was originally scheduled to testify, but unfortunately, she was called away to an emergency and definitely sent her deep regrets. I'm joining you this afternoon on behalf of United Way and as a supporter of the Homes for All Coalition to testify in support of additional funding for the Family Homeless Prevention and Assistance Program. At Greater Twin Cities United Way, our mission is to build pathways toward prosperity and equity for all, touching over 500,000 lives across the 9-county metro area. And we all know that a stable home is the foundation that enables all Minnesotans to thrive. Yet, unfortunately, many families continue to struggle to access and maintain stable housing, especially now with the COVID-19 pandemic. The impact of this pandemic has been particularly difficult for Minnesotans in low-wealth households. So we've had closures of restaurants and small businesses, and other employers have put hourly workers in challenging positions when it comes to paying their rent, their mortgages, utilities, and other bills. I'd like to share now some data from the Greater Twin Cities United Way's 211 resource helpline. Let me see am I able to share, Joel?
Yes, you should be able to. There should be a green button that says share screen at the bottom, right in the middle of your screen. Do you see that?
Yep, I do. It gives me a nice little pop-up saying the host disabled screen sharing. So,
all right, well, let me see what I can do to help you on that.
If not, I can certainly go forward. I think all the committee members did get a copy of that slide.
They did. Why don't you continue to address your issues, and I'll just see if I can share your screen.
Okay.
Try it now. I just changed a setting.
Oh, great. Let me see here. All right. Can you see that now?
Yes, we can.
Coming up. Okay. Perfect. All right. Sorry about that. But I did think it was important. I do think that the numbers are really impactful. So rent assistance referrals made to our 211 resource helpline for the metro area counties during the last 2 weeks of March of this year compared to the same period of last year show a dramatic and marked increase. So if you look at the graph in the last 2 weeks of March last year, we referred over 446 more callers from Hennepin County to rent assistance resources compared to last year. And in Ramsey County, it was over a 200, almost a 250% increase in need. And I think what's really astounding is we're also seeing an increase in rent assistance requests in the surrounding counties that are even higher. This was represented by a 900% increase in Anoka County, an 833% increase in Washington County, and a 716% increase in Dakota County. And I think that this really goes to show that even in places that maybe there haven't been traditional needs, now there's quite a bit more demand for rent assistance and resources that we haven't seen in the past. So FHPAP is an extremely important program that can be used for direct assistance to help folks such as these callers for rent, utilities, and other expenses, or even services like housing, search, or navigation for low wealth families and individuals who are at imminent risk of homelessness. The need for emergency FHPAP funding is supported by a wide variety of organizations, and we believe this is an important way to get support to renters and landlords to help stabilize access to already scarce housing resources across the state. As our community navigates the COVID-19 crisis, Greater Twin Cities United Way is committed to supporting those impacted by its effects and bringing the community together in the face of these unprecedented challenges. We appreciate the hard work all of you are doing at the legislature and request your support for emergency FHPAP funding. Thank you much to all of you.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate that. And we will continue down the list here. Kristen and City. I know I butchered that name, so I apologize.
Actually, you did just fine. Thank you very much for having me, Chair Westrom and Chair Johnson, and members of the committee this afternoon. My name is Kristen City, and I'm the Executive Director of Habitat for Humanity of Minnesota. We are a state support organization for all 28 Habitat affiliates in Minnesota. So we represent both urban and rural areas of Minnesota, and they've served more than 2,500 low and moderate income households through homeownership opportunities in the state. And I'm here today to show our support for this bill and for funding for FHPAP. Habitat for Humanity has been working throughout Minnesota for more than 35 years, providing these homeownership opportunities to households who otherwise wouldn't be able to achieve affordable homeownership. So thank you for your efforts for supporting affordable housing and including an appropriation to support this real need that we've talked about already today. As many of you know, we learned a great deal about the need for affordable homeownership and the barriers to achieving it and maintaining it over the last decade and through the Great Recession. We know that it is less costly and easier for us to keep people in their homes now rather than have them lose their housing. We know that it is better for each household to avoid longer-term debt and to make their mortgage payments every month rather than try to dig out of delinquencies down the road. We also know that our state fares better financially when households maintain their ownership than when we need to recover from those losses. Any and all efforts to prioritize keeping families in their homes today will support a stronger future for our state after we get through this pandemic. All 28 Habitat affiliates from the state are receiving calls from their homeowners asking for some form of financial relief. I do want to point out that Habitat is different than a typical single family developer or a typical mortgage holder. Habitat affiliates uniquely not only build and develop their homes, but then also sell them and typically maintain those mortgages on their books. So Habitat homeowners are paying directly to the local Habitat affiliate through which they purchase their home. And why I think that's important to note is because as we talk about housing stability in Minnesota, those homes are not federally backed mortgages. So when we look at federal subsidies for federally backed mortgages, Habitat homeowners do not qualify for those. So I just want to point that unique difference out as far as this goes. In some preliminary reviews, 9 out of the 12 affiliates who responded to a recent survey stated that food service and restaurant work was one of the main jobs their homeowners held, followed by other service industry roles that have since been either slowed or eliminated due to the pandemic. So this is a workforce housing issue and a concern that we all need to be paying attention to. Affiliates are estimating between 10 to up to 50% of their homeowners being behind on their payments due to layoffs and furloughs. So representing these 28 Habitat affiliates around the state, we're thankful for this bill and this emergency funding. We're also thankful for the intentional note about utilizing the resource for mortgage payments and other relevant home ownership expenses. We know that this fund has historically been used on rental assistance. And we look forward to working with the agency on ensuring eligible homeowners can readily access this direct financial relief in their communities before foreclosure is imminent. Stay-at-home works best when families can actually stay at home. Parents are able to provide a stable environment for their kids. Seniors are more able to age well at home. And our public health stays well if everyone has a safe, stable, affordable home. It's critical to our state that we prioritize the support in our communities. And I just want to thank you for the work that you're doing on this and for offering me the opportunity to speak today and testify on behalf of Habitat in Minnesota. Thanks for everything you're doing.
Well, thank you for taking time to do that. Appreciate the testimony. Mr. Gray, you can unmute and begin your testimony whenever you're ready.
Okay, thank you very much. Chair Westrom and members of the committee, my name is Bill Gray, and I am Stakeholder Relations Director at the nonprofit Minnesota Home Ownership Center. The center believes that owning a home is the foundation for personal success. For the last 25 years, we've worked to educate potential home buyers on the complicated process of qualifying for a mortgage, affording down payment and closing costs, and transitioning to sustainable home ownership. We've carried this work out by partnering with more than 40 community-based organizations throughout the state to offer unbiased home buyer advisory services and our homestretch home ownership education curriculum. We work primarily with households of color and lower income households, and last year, 63% of those households that we served represented communities of color, and the median income of households served was $38,000. We've also worked tirelessly to support current homeowners experiencing challenges in maintaining ownership via foreclosure prevention counseling. Since 2008, we've worked with our network partners to help more than 37,000 households successfully avoid foreclosure and maintain the stability that home ownership offers. Sadly, with the ongoing unprecedented economic and financial upheaval due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we anticipate demand for our foreclosure prevention work to increase dramatically over the short term. The Minnesota Home Ownership Center is determined to prevent a repeat of the 2008 foreclosure crisis, during which so many lower and middle income individuals and families lost so much. Back then, our network organizations were frontline responders. We worked to quickly raise and deploy resources to support foreclosure prevention, advocacy, housing development, and community healing. But even with these and other loss mitigation efforts, Minnesota experienced a staggering 135,000 foreclosures from 2008 to 2014. Households of color were disproportionately impacted and have still not yet fully recovered. This cannot be allowed to happen again. In order to be more successful this time around, we need immediate, strong leadership and bold action by policymakers such as yourselves. Extending the Family Homeless Prevention and Assistance Program to benefit owners as well as renters is a good example of such bold leadership, and we are standing by to roll up our sleeves, ramp up our programming, and dig in our heels to help every homeowner in the state that needs our help. Homeownership preservation is homelessness prevention, and we commend you for your vision. Thank you for your time, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gray. Appreciate that. And next on deck is Angela Larson. Ms. Larson, if you could, there I see you, unmute, and you're ready to go anytime you want to start.
Thank you, Senator Johnson and Senator Westrom and the rest of the committee for allowing me to testify today. My name is Angela Larson, and I'm the Family Services Director for United Community Action Partnership. We administer the Family Homeless Prevention and Assistance Program in the 18 rural counties in Southwest Minnesota. FHPAP is a flexible program, meaning it can be used to meet the specific needs of people in our communities. And FHPAP, as you've heard from some of the other speakers, funds more than just rental assistance. This program also can help people pay their mortgages, utilities, and more. And the program is running in all 87 counties and 11 reservations in the state. Without this one-time funding, we will face a dire housing crisis for renters, landlords, and homeowners. UCAP does provide a variety of emergency housing services, but FHPAP is the only real source of funding that we're able to use to keep people in their current housing. We administer and provide services for FHPAP in 13 of our 18 counties, with Prairie 5 Community Action serving the other 5 counties as part of our grant. In 2019, we served 356 households in our region with these funds. And we're still serving people with as little person-to-person contact as possible, but all of our offices are still staffed with the minimum number of people to continue to respond to those who must meet face to face. Every year and every quarter, we always have a shortage of FHPA funds, but due to the COVID-19 crisis, we are already starting to run out of funds earlier than usual. Very soon, we'll be out of funding and won't have more until July 1st. Even though landlords cannot currently evict for non-payment, we are still seeing an increased number of people who are being asked to leave a doubled up situation because of social distancing and the need to isolate. We also are hearing that landlords are afraid to give tenants past due notices because they're afraid it will look like they are crossing the line even without threatening eviction. This is actually perpetuating a misunderstanding some people are having, thinking that they will not have to pay their missed rent payments once this moratorium on evictions is over. Like, I didn't get a late notice, so I must not have to pay. And with the increased need that is already happening all around the state, we believe that this is just the tip of the iceberg. Once the ban on eviction is lifted, there will be many households who are very behind, and the landlords will immediately begin to demand payment. They need those funds. And if the tenant can't pay, they will be evicted. We actually have a couple of instances where we have served some people recently that I'd just like to share with you. And I've changed the name. So Jennifer is a member of one of our tribal nations in our area, and her only source of income with her children was the per capita payments she had been receiving. This income came to a halt when the casino closed. She had been renting a place since 2016 with no problems at all before this. We were able to help her stabilize her housing by paying her April rent and helping her file her taxes, so she will receive her stimulus payment. We've helped her find employment and get connected to mainstream resources as well. The FHPAP funds that we had available at that time helped her get caught up, and between the stimulus payment and her new employment, she should be able to maintain her situation. In another instance, Kevin lived in our area and he worked for a meat processing plant. He actually lost his job right before the COVID crisis and had some interviews lined up, but all of them were canceled because of the COVID crisis. He did fall behind on his rent, and his landlord kept sending him eviction messages via Facebook despite the executive order. He didn't want to get legal aid or the authorities involved because he didn't have a signed lease. So we were able to help him move into an income-based unit without a day of homelessness because of our FHPAP program. FHPAP is critical to our state's response to COVID-19. Thank you so much for allowing me to testify, and I urge you to support this request. Thanks.
Hey, thank you so much, Angela. Next up is Eric Hauge.
Thank you, Chair Johnson and Chair Westrom and committee members for the opportunity to testify regarding Senate File 4495. Sorry, I don't have my video up and running because you don't want to see my kids running past. I'm the executive director with Homeline, a statewide tenant advocacy nonprofit organization. We operate a statewide legal hotline for renters. Since opening, we've advised nearly 250,000 renter households, the predominantly low-income households. We've recently advised over 700 households impacted by COVID-related housing instability in hundreds of cities throughout the state. Low-income renters are most impacted by job losses and reduced hours. So we have to advise our clients for the worst-case scenario, that there may not be enough rental assistance and a flood of evictions will be filed once the peacetime emergency ends, which could be as soon as May 13th. For many tenants, housing court before this crisis was already overcrowded and intimidating. Because of this need we're seeing, our support must be in line with the greatest amount possible in rental assistance. We strongly encourage this committee to support the $100 million proposed by the House. Just as important, this bill ends the eviction suspension well before the federal CARES Act timeline, which is in late July and requires a notice through late August. A shorter suspension than the CARES Act will lead to mass confusion for tenants, landlords, and the courts. Landlords may be required to swear under oath that they are not covered under the CARES Act in order to file an action, but many smaller operators will have no idea exactly what financing is used to secure their mortgage. A bill like this clearly covers all rentals in the state, unlike the CARES Act, and so it should at minimum require that a suspension track the CARES Act timeline in order to simply reduce uncertainty and confusion for all. The risk really is on the short end, not the long end. Further, while we appreciate that the bill suspends late fees, it proposes ending that protection sooner than the CARES Act. Matching that notice period is an absolute must as well. Lastly, this bill does not reflect a critical piece of House File 4541, which is also a provision in the CARES Act, a 30-day notice period after the emergency to give tenants, landlords, and the courts clarity on overdue amounts before eviction actions are filed. Thanks for your time. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Well, thank you very much. Now, a person who I think we're all very familiar with, the real Ron Elwood. Please stand up and you can begin anytime here.
Thank you, Chair Johnson and members of the committee. I really appreciate the opportunity. Obviously, you saved the best for last. I do want to thank you, Senator Westrom and Senator Weber, for putting this bill together. Thank you, Joel Hansen. I really appreciate it. And all the committee for the work and your efforts during this crisis. Legal Aid strongly supports the provisions of Senate File 4495 that prohibit eviction filings except for the expedited evictions, include suspension of the execution of writs. That was an excellent addition, including manufactured home park leases, a great addition, prohibiting foreclosures, providing direct payments to landlords, manufactured home park owners, mortgagers, contract for deed vendors, and utility companies. Excellent drafting to provide the money directly to the providers of housing. And finally, really appreciate providing assistance for households up to 300% of the federal poverty guidelines. This was a really well thought out a bill on those fronts. I do have a number of technical issues and concerns that I'd like to bring to the committee's attention. First, I think Mr. Hauge did point out the mismatch between this bill and the federal CARES Act. And I do think the concerns about confusion and who's covered and who's not are very real, and that's something that the committee should really take under consideration. Second, I'd like to just point out the foreclosure moratorium, which is very welcome. It does not address cancellations of contracts for deed. That's not a foreclosure, but in the same realm. So we would recommend that there be an amendment to do that, especially since contract for deed vendors appropriately are eligible for assistance payments under Section 5. And third, on line 1.13, with respect to the terminations of leases, notwithstanding what Mr. Dunleavy was suggesting to be clarified, we'd also suggest a non-renewals be included in there because it's exactly the same situation. Fourth, Mr. Dunleavy pointed out some potential conflicts in lines 1.21 and lines 2.12 regarding the waiver of the late fees, and then the nothing abrogates the contracts. We agree with his analysis, as we always have. I've worked with Mr. Dunleavy for many, many years, and he is a brilliant attorney and represents the Bar Association well. But we do have an idea to fix that. So if you want, we'd be happy to talk to Mr. Knopf or anybody else. And just three final quick points. First of all, we note that under the bill, to become eligible for assistance, you don't only have to be sick. I mean, you don't only have to have a job loss or a loss of income, but you also have to be sick. And in the beginning of the presentation, Chair Westrom, your bill, you suggested these were ors. Actually, they're ands. And so you have to be all three. You have to have the loss of income, you have to be income eligible, but you also have to be sick. And we would suggest that the COVID-related inability to pay plus the percent of income poverty cap should be the only criteria necessary to apply for assistance. The next thing is that we note that the bill suggests that debts must be past due. And what we would suggest here is that assistance should be available if there's a rent or other payment that's coming due within 14 days of the application, because it would seem so long as folks are unemployed or underemployed, their financial crisis will not abate, and these funds ought to help head off the next month's crisis for as long as this is available. Also, you have a letter from the Minnesota Bankers Association, one from the Minnesota Credit Union Network, seeking an exemption for the foreclosure moratorium for abandoned properties. I worked with them and Mr. Dunleavy and many others during the foreclosure crisis back in the mid-2000s to enhance the ability of cities and other lien holders to more rapidly acquire abandoned properties so they don't lay fallow and have all the attendant problems of that. So I would like just to support the friendly amendment that the bankers have suggested. So finally, while I understand the concerns about the current and the future state of Minnesota finances, we would hope that you could see your way clear to increase the housing assistance, because as others have said over and over again, the less help available now means more personal, community, and state economic pain down the road. So finally, thank you really for the breadth of the protections that you propose here and for recognizing that landlords and tenants, homeowners and lenders, manufactured homeowners and manufactured park owners, contract for deed vendors and vendees, condominium owners and homeowners associations, and utility customers and utility companies are all in this together. Thanks very much for your time, and I really hope you can move these bills quickly to passage. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate that. So I think at this moment, we'll transition over to questions. And Senator Draheim had one very early on. And I'd like to thank the testifiers for holding on to the end here for questions. So we've got Senator Draheim, you got the first, and then Senator Weber, you'll be up next.
Senator Westrom also wants to speak.
Senator Westrom, do you want to go first?
Go ahead, Senator Draheim, but I had a question for Mr. Elwood once it works.
Okay. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Senator Johnson. Commissioner Ho, I guess my first conversation would be with you on the programs that we have going on with the COVID-19. The unemployment rate in Minnesota is growing by the week, and we have about 500,000 or 500,000 people claiming unemployment in Minnesota. And if I remember right, we have about 2.2, 2.4 households. So just kind of tracking that a little bit. And when I'm being told by people collecting unemployment, they get the $600 per week from the feds on top of their unemployment. So they're actually making more on unemployment than they would have if they were working. Are we factoring this in to how much money we're going to need to help out the rental industry, if you would? That would be my first question.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. Mr. Chair and Senator Draheim, thank you. I think that what we have learned over the course of the last 5 or 6 weeks is that nobody's got a great model yet for what the impact of this is. And I have heard some similar things about that $600 top off, but I just don't want to pretend that we have a model available on that. I don't know, Ryan, if you want to come sit here with me in the Zoom space, if you would add anything to that, but that's my answer. We know this is big. We know this is big. We just don't know how big yet.
Thank you. And I guess if I could follow up with that on the moving forward, we're running out of money. Every committee hearing we're having, how are you going to pay for this? How are you going to pay for this? So it'd be kind of nice to have some modeling, and I'm sure you guys are discussing it, moving forward. If this goes on, how much are we going to need per month to help assist people to stay in their homes? And then my second, are you working on any advertising program or anything to tell people that the rent isn't forgiven as of right now, and that at the end of their lease, they will have to pay their rent? And I think you froze up.
You broke up a little, Mr. Chair, Senator Draheim. I'm getting a choppy feed, but I think you asked if we're going to advertise that people should pay their rent, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple things. I don't want to imply that we're not gathering data and trying to build a model. I'm just saying that we don't have enough data points to be able to know what the trend line looks like. As one of my bosses used to say, 2 data points don't make a trend. So we have to just continue to gather data on this and take a look. But we're certainly looking at data from a lot of different sources and trying to use it to inform the decisions that we're making. And then I'll also say, from the very first day that the governor announced the evictions executive order, he built into the message that you got to pay your rent, you got to pay your mortgage if you can. And we have been using that consistently. And as we moved into April 1st, he repeated those messages in his daily briefing. And as we move into May 1st, next Friday, we will use those messages as well. I think right now the governors are most cost-effective form of advertising. So we will continue to promote that, but we're also using all the channels, that we have available. We did a frequently asked questions piece for both our single family side of the business and our multifamily side of the business. And we are using that as internal messaging out to all of our partners as well.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you.
All right, with that, then we will move to Senator Weber.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Okay, I have a couple of things. First, I wanted to, since that was the most recent testimony, if to Mr. Elwood's comments concerning the fact that you have to be sick in order to collect any of the rental assistance. As I read lines 6.1 through the end, it seemed to me that there are different options that you qualify. One is, yes, if you have an illness. The others are if and your income is reduced. The other is if you have a relative that has the illness and you cannot go out and work, and that, or you have lost your income as a result of your loss of employment due to the peacetime emergency declared by the governor. I don't think you have to meet all those requirements unless I am misinterpreting that. Mr. Knopf, would you have a comment on that?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Senator Weber, that's how I read it also. I was a little confused by the comment because we do have an or in there, and it seems that there would be more people that qualify than what was stated in the
well, Mr. Chair, Mr. Weber, and Mr. Knopf, the way I read it was on lines 4.9 through 4.18, it said to be eligible, an applicant must have a public health emergency, which includes the sickness, and then have all these other things. So if I'm reading it wrong, that's great. And if you're suggesting that you don't have to be, having the illness is not a prerequisite, then that would be great.
But I think that was intended to kind of cover the overall public health emergency that's going on in the state with regard to COVID-19, not that you individually have to have it.
Well, great. Then I stand corrected and happily so. Thank you so much.
That was the intent.
Okay, and Mr. Chairman, I have a question for the commissioner as well.
Please go ahead.
One of the things that, and thank you for your comments earlier, Commissioner, one of the comments you made was having some type of an end date as it relates to the eviction moratorium. And I guess one of the things that has concerned me since April 6th was the fact that when Senator Westrom made the counteroffer to Representative Hausman, basically the two items that were different than the House bill was the amount of money, and number two, rather than having two 30-day extensions of the eviction moratorium, there was only one. And then, quite frankly, it was crickets because nobody responded back with any type of a counteroffer. I guess, what is your opinion, Commissioner, as to how long can the state tamp down the property rights of the owners in terms of being able to collect rent. Particularly, I understand we don't have rental assistance for those that have COVID-related issues, but for those who are not paying their rent, and I just want to share with you one of my communities. There's a community-owned facility that has 9 tenants. All of them are continuing. They have the same jobs today that they had last month. And none of the 9 paid their rent because they said they didn't have to. So this is going to be a problem. It is going to take, they are not going to qualify for state assistance, but it is going to be an initial problem for our property owners. So what do you believe, Commissioner, is some type of a date certain that we can live with? I mean, if the total of 4 months, 60 days plus 2 30-day extensions that Chair Hausman had proposed, in which she said she had worked with your staff to put together a bill, is that acceptable? Or isn't it?
Mr. Chair and Senator Weber?
Yes.
Go ahead, Ms.
Okay, I just want to make sure. Okay, we're good.
Yep.
This is new protocol for me too. So first of all, reflecting on the question that Senator Draheim asked about being able to project and see the future, the biggest variable that I don't know is time, because the virus sets the timeline. And that's the thing that I think is the most frustrating to all of us, is that we just don't know how long it's going to be unsafe for folks to remain in their home. We have done our best since the moment that we introduced this executive order to be really, really clear in all of our communications that we're not saying to people, don't pay your rent. We're doing that in a broader environment in which other people are promoting those types of messages. And we are trying to use the outlets and the governor's briefing remarks and conversations with the media to be really clear that that is not our position. And that the One Minnesota approach to this is a win-win position where we have financial resources so that tenants can pay their landlords, landlords can pay their bills, where homeowners can pay their banks. And in some places, depending on what kind of mortgage you have, for example, the federal government has created some additional tools, but they're not broadly applied. And so since April 6th even, the stay-at-home order has been extended. The timeline for how we're thinking about peak hospital surge has been pushed into June and July. And I just think that it's been a bottom line issue for the governor the whole time, that he needs to be able to make decisions that are in the best interest of the state's public health, and that to think that we can see ahead further than we can in the middle of a global pandemic it's just not possible. And so, this really is, even today, right, with the amazing news that Mayo Clinic and the University of Minnesota and the health systems are going to have dramatically expanded testing capacity. We didn't know that yesterday. That's great news today. But it's still only one of a series of things, including, the ability to get an immunization that needs to come into play for this to be safe for our elders. And so, that has just been, I think, something that we have tried to be really clear about the whole time. And that's, I think I hear Cecil when he talks about the desire to have a specific date. I hear him. I hear the landlords who are talking to us about the desire to have a specific date. And we can set a specific date, but it's the virus that's driving the timeline. And that's what I know.
Well, and Madam Chair, I certainly, can appreciate that. I think it's also important as the administration considers all these things that if at some point we do not start the business of going again, there isn't going to be a lot of a state left to govern. And you commented in your comments about the need to have a robust bonding program whereby we can build additional housing. However, if I was a prospective developer and I would look at what the state is doing in terms of controlling my ability to manage my property, I got to be honest with you, I would seriously question whether I want to develop in Minnesota for a while. Because if things are going to be as uncertain as you indicate with the virus, why would I take that chance? And so I really think that serious consideration needs to be given by the administration to a specific end time. And so I just wanted to make that point because I think that that is going to be, at the end of the day, that's going to be a real problem. And for those who could pay their rent and are not paying their rent, I personally think we should do away with the no late penalty, no late fee penalties. They need to understand that because they can pay their rent and they're not, they are going to wind up paying more. And the sad thing is, I would guess that many of the people who make the decision to not pay their rent, even though they could, if we go down the road 3-4 months and they haven't paid their rent, they aren't going to have the money then to pay the rent either, because that money will probably have been spent somewhere else, even though they've been continuing to work. So those are my comments, Madam Commissioner.
Like you say, we've got Senators Dietzich and France, but we have a follow-up from Senator Draheim. So Senator Draheim, would you please ask a question?
I'll let the other people ask questions first, but thank you.
Okay, Senator Dietzich.
Howdy. So I have a bunch of questions. So thank you for the discussion today. First, I appreciate this bill coming forward. And I will say that I was part of those earlier discussions, like Senator Westrom said. And I know one of the questions that I had when the bills came back and forth was, and the concern that I had was the limiting of the extensions by the governor. So I understand why we want an end date, and I was all in favor of an end date, just to give clarity. But my concern is, because we don't know what's going on, and we won't be here, that what happens if this goes on and it gets really bad again, and we do have to do another stay-at-home order a few months out, or the head of the CDC was saying it could come back next winter really bad, and if we're not here, then the governor needs to act. So one of my questions to you all was going to be, would you, I'm just kind of wondering, several testifiers have said, that it would kind of make sense to maybe align with the timeliness timelines of the feds with the timeline of the federal bill, because you will have even landlords not knowing, well, they might think that I don't have federal financing and they actually do, or, there's just could be a lot of confusion. So just throwing it out there, the discussion of, would you be okay with removing that language where you're, and I think it's on 2.22, no extensions are allowed after this 30-day period. If it were to be put in something like that, the governor could do it with the consideration and in consultation with the governor or the legislature. So the governor would have to consult with us if he was going to do it again. So that's just something to throw out there, consider. And then I do have some technical questions. So if you go to 2.1, so under section 2, so wait, I'll just go back. So I just want to clarify for the record, my read of section 1 is you have the evictions, and that these covers all evictions. And then you go to the funding, and so it is tied to COVID. And one of the questions I have So on 6.1, and this might be again addressed in the on page 4, but I'll just kind of ask Mr. Knopf or anybody. So in 6.1 to 6.9, so first you need an illness, either of an individual or someone from the family member that prevents them from going to work. And then starting at 6.4, you have a reduction in income by 15% or more, or temporary or permanent unemployment due to the peacetime emergency. So we heard about the JBS plant that was closing. So they were actually up and running during this peacetime emergency, and then the virus shut them down. So there were some people that were ill there, so they would qualify under 6.1 to 6.3, but maybe not everybody there was ill. So do they still qualify because they weren't shut down necessarily by the peacetime emergency, because they were kind of essential workers, you know, they were shut down later. So I just want to clarify, we don't need to maybe address this now, but I just want to clarify, would they be covered under this? Or do we need to clarify that you know, it is from the unemployment due to the peacetime emergency declared by the governor, or actually, you know, a COVID outbreak?
Mr. Knopf?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Senator Dietzig, that's a good point. I mean, I think you could interpret it to include that, because I mean, the whole thing's an emergency, but since it's not specifically part of the order, it probably would make sense to include or a COVID outbreak, just to be clear on it.
Okay. All right, and then I think others have mentioned, I'm glad that we included the mobile park. I agree with, you know, we had the discussions of the cancellation of CD, and I'm glad that we kept them, the contract for deeds covered under the financing portion. And so it might be something we want to look at adding back in here somewhere. I think the timeline for them to, I think they're even, you know, shorter than the foreclosure timeline. So that might be something good to add. So my city appreciates that we go to 300% on line 4.16. So just to share for everybody out there that's listening, so for families making up to 300% of the federal poverty guideline, and for 2020, if you're a family of 4, I think that's about $78,000. And so this is hitting the, you know, upper middle class. I know, I think it hits about 100,000 of my households in the city of Minneapolis would qualify for that. And since a lot of them, at least in my area, were restaurant owners, bar workers, restaurant workers, taproom workers, distillery workers, and artists and students, a lot of my district is shut down. So we appreciate that. The other question I have, getting back to section 2. So if we look at on 2.2, 2.20, you extend it for 30 days. But then on 2.22, you have the total number of days of the extension allowed under the section is 30 days. But then on 2.27, the landlord may not terminate the lease during the 60-day period. So my confusion is, are you talking about this extension period? And so this is just a typo, because in earlier discussions, we did have it for a 30-day extension. So you could do but the total number of days allowed was 60 days. But now we've reduced that to 30. So does on 2.27, should that be a 30-day period, or should it just be should it just say a landlord may not terminate a lease during this extension period? Because the lease can't be terminated in section 1. That's under 1.13. But I just think that's confusing. So, and then you have it again on 2.30, leases expiring during the 60-day period. So that, I think for clarity's sake, should either be during this extension period or during this 30-day extension period, because I just think it's confusing. Are you going back to the first 60 days, or should that be a 30-day?
Mr. Knopf.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Dietzke, that was my error. When we changed this to 30-day, I did not make those corresponding changes in paragraph B. Senator Westrom has an amendment that would fix, one of the things it would do would fix that.
Okay.
But that was just an error.
Yep, that's what I figured, but I just wanted to confirm. So then the other question is, again, on 230 here, leases expiring during the 60-day period must be extended to the end of the period if requested by the tenant. So if it expires during the first 60 days, are they automatically extended?
Mr. Knopf.
Well, Mr. Chair and Senator Dietzke, Section 2 should be read by itself. It's not really part of the terminations in Section 1.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually once the governor does the extension, then the provisions in there apply to that, but they don't necessarily apply to Section 1.
Do we need something in Section 1 saying leases expiring during this 60-day period must be extended to the end of the period if requested by the tenant? Or can that, is that not needed because? In there too? Okay. I think those are all my questions, but I would just like to ask the chair and others if they, what they think about extending it for the 120 days just to align with what the federal bill does, just to make it simpler for consistency's sake. It could, for my purpose, go back to, leave as the current 60 days and then go to, 2 30-day extensions if needed. And then what your thoughts are all on if the governor could be doing an extension, as long as it's beyond that time frame, as long as it's in consultation with the legislature. So thank you. And I think that's all I have for now.
All right. Thank you, Senator. So next up is Senator Frentz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Senator Westrom, for bringing this forward. Thanks, advocates, for the time and testimony they put in. This is something we can do that can really help. I would just start by echoing Senator Dietzke's question about the governor's authority. I am one who believes the governor has the authority in the time of emergency to issue an additional order, so I'm nervous about any language which would restrict that. I would support the compromise, if you like that term, that Senator Dietzke has mentioned about consultation with the legislature. As many of us know, the Attorney General rendered an opinion that the governor was within his constitutional boundaries. And as Senator Johnson knows, lawyers are never wrong. I would also add on the bonding that we're hearing a lot of support for housing infrastructure bonds and housing preservation bonds. And I know bonding is a separate topic, but as it relates to housing, I hope every member of this committee will see the value in a robust bonding bill that addresses, among other things, those two types of bonds to help continue to provide relief to COVID-19 effects, but also to our affordable housing shortage. I think that's going to be very important. With that, Mr. Chair, I would just say thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Frentz. So let's go back. Senator Draheim, if you still have your question, why don't you go ahead?
Okay. Thank you, Chair Johnson. I guess my follow-up would be probably to Commissioner Ho or Ryan or somebody on the flyers that get hung up about a rent strike for May 1st, and kind of that language, and I guess that's some of the frustration I'm hearing from people, that they know that tenants are either still working, 80% of the economy is still up and working. The 20% businesses have been shut down. We're record number of unemployment. We're paying the $600, and then we see these posters up there, and I guess that's kind of why I asked the question about marketing, and I know I've heard the governor many times mention it, and of course you've mentioned it, Commissioner, and I really appreciate that. But is there anything else that we can do to help fight that mentality?
Mr. Chair and Senator Draheim, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Well, I mean, the easy answer is to make a big investment in the family homeless prevention dollars, because it would actually create a way for people to pay. I've been on a number of phone calls with the Lieutenant Governor and others in the governor's office with some of the advocates who are promoting the rent holiday, the rent strike. And we've had very candid conversations about how dangerous that language is and the difficult situation that will put people in when this period of time is over. So, and that the win-win here is to get the family homeless prevention funding because it helps both. The other thing I just want to say is that as we watch the CARES Act get put together in DC, and then now the deal that's coming together now, with all this attention to small business, it didn't attend to landlords as a business. And I think that's a real miss. But I also believe that housing is going to get on the Congress's agenda eventually if this thing plays out for a long time. I mean, they've been pretty focused on the healthcare part of it and the small business part of it, as we see in the bill that's coming together right now out there. But I think we just really appreciate that all these landlords, whether it's Aon and Allen Arthur or Common Bond or Dominium or some of you have small rental units, that you are small businesses. It's just that you're not covered in that regard. And one of the ways is we've been looking at what the long-time economic impacts are to the Housing Finance Agency, is that we're just trying to figure out how bad does it have to get for certain sectors for Congress to then do it. We saw a huge housing component in the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, but that took a while. So I think that's all a part of what's going to play out over time here. But I think consistent messaging from all of us that we're on the same page. We believe that we need to make these investments up front while we're waiting to see how this is going to play out, while we're waiting for the federal government to come in and do its part, because it's a win-win. And if people have the money, they got to pay the rent. And the nice thing about the Family Homeless Prevention Assistance Program, it was designed to make sure that when somebody's having a conversation with somebody, they're checking the right paperwork, that the assistance is going to the landlord, and other things that I think are important to all of us. So I think that the sooner that we can unite around a package here for family homeless prevention and assistance, I just think that helps us just kind of have a clear message out about how we're going to solve this in the meantime, and that a rent strike or a rent holiday is a really, really, really bad idea, because it's going to put people in really bad shape when we come out on the other end of this. So if there are more places that I can be speaking, if there are media outlets in your areas, if there's somebody that I can pick up and call on the phone and say, don't be stupid, pay your rent. Yeah, I'm happy to be the conveyor of that message. And because I just really think that sometimes, what sounds good on Twitter, it just is really bad for people in the long run. So I'm with you, sir.
All right, Senator Draheim, any follow-up? You're good. Okay, so I've got 3 hands raised here. Senator France is on top. Do you have anything further?
Just a little bit, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Ho, I think what you're hearing from the committee is that the louder the message goes out that a rent strike is inappropriate in a lot of cases, the better it might make those of us who are hearing from landlords feel. We're trying to support those that don't have any way to pay their rent. That's exactly what I think this committee should be doing. But to the extent that people are taking advantage of it, and I'm not saying everyone's taking advantage of it, I'm just saying that's the sensitivity. Our landlords are small business people too. And if you're willing to be heard anyone who knows how to work the Twitter could put out, Commissioner Ho, really, really, really bad idea. And I think you'd find the committee members more comfortable with the idea that you're open against the rent strike and make it easier for us to hammer this thing together. Just a thought, Mr. Chair. Thank you for everything, Commissioner. Seriously.
And Mr. Chair and Senator France, so if you want to quote, I think a rent strike is a really, really, really bad idea. Thank you.
End quote. All right. Thank you, Commissioner. I appreciate the pertinent emphasis on that. Senator Dietzich, your hand is raised still. Do you have a question?
Thank you. So I just kind of want to also, as brief as possible, because I know we're getting long here, that someone is mentioning the need for federal dollars. And while the CARES Act has put out a ton of money, I want to just say they have not put out, they did a good job in money for homelessness. They gave money to CDBG grants in public housing, which I think is helpful, but they didn't put money for rental assistance. And so that is where I think the quandary is. And where Senator Drankheim mentioned earlier that, you know, we have some people collecting unemployment and the $600 additional checks. I have people in my district who have not been able to get through to deed yet, haven't heard back from deed yet, so don't have their unemployment, and they haven't gotten the $600 yet. So that's where some of this is, where I think it's helpful for us to get the money out because they aren't getting that other money. And then, you know, hopefully the feds will act, especially if this goes longer, to put in more rental assistance. And then my other question is, so what is the plan for this bill moving forward here today?
Senator Westrom. Well, I guess Senator Dietzich, what we're going to be doing is moving it to finance at this point, and then at some point it'll have to go through Rules Committee before
Senator Johnson.
But yes, go ahead, Senator Westrom.
I'm not sure if my video's back on. Okay.
Yep. I see ya.
So Senator Johnson, I've got a question or two for I think it's Keith, the gentleman from the bar, and then just giving us a little roadmap. We need to be adjourned by 5 or so here, and I know we've had a lot of good discussion. I think my intention would be to finish a little more discussion, and then we would probably be looking at laying this over on the table, and then sometime tomorrow, Friday or Monday, bring it back up for final vote. So just to inform people kind of where we're at based on time and deadlines. But if I could ask the gentleman, I think is it Keith from the state MSBA, 2 questions, Keith. You talked about the foreclosure aspects, and it seems like that's primarily the areas you were targeting with concerns and problems and conflicts potentially with statutes. If that was removed, would that alleviate most of your concerns? And then I have a follow-up question.
Mr. Chair, Senator Westrom, I believe I've sent an email to Joel Hansen with some suggested edits that I think take care of it. I don't know that you need to remove Section 4 of the bill. I think I just clarified it a little bit.
Okay. And if you could, my second question is relating to the aspect of late fees, which are usually included in a lease, and then your comment. Could you explain that conflict a little bit more, and then I have a follow-up.
Senator Westrom, you froze up there for one moment. Could you restate that? I know the other thing.
I'm going to shut my video off. I think that helps sometimes.
Okay. The other thing is we've got a fairly hard stop, it sounds like, at 5 o'clock. What we're going to end up doing here today is laying this bill over and trying to get another conference committee together. It sounds like on Friday, and Joel will be sending out notifications for those items. But with that, Senator Westrom, I want you to finish up with what you can here.
Okay. Keith, what did you hear? My question is, what is the concern about the conflict and the language that doesn't, indicates we're not intending to alter any lease.
Well, the conflicting, the language says that this doesn't change the terms of the lease, but then landlords are prohibited from charging late fees. So the email that I sent to Joel Hansen, the draft, just puts an exception in that so that the prohibition for charging late fees is okay. So it eliminates the conflict.
Senator Westrom, is that, did you hear that answer?
What's that?
Did you hear that answer from Kevin?
I did. Repeat it if.
Repeat the answer?
Well, I think I heard the email. Bart, was it a short answer? I maybe missed it.
I think I fixed the conflict in my email. I just put some language saying that the prohibition against late fees is accepted from the language. It says nothing changes the lease.
Okay, and so maybe my last question for now, and Keith or Kevin, are you able to join us again on a meeting we reconvene?
Sure, I'm happy to help.
And Kevin, how does changing the late fees if they're in a lease square with the Constitution, Article 1, Section 11? Have you looked at that ever? Because the legislature is impaired from altering a contract, and how would you assess that if we went ahead with late fee restrictions, which are lease based? Generally speaking, they have to be in a lease, and other aspects of the lease. When the Constitution, Article 1, Section 11, clearly lays out the legislature shall not impugn a contract.
Senator Westrom,
is there any concerns you have with that, or is that not?
You're a better lawyer than me because you caught that. I think you're right that there's an issue about impairment of contracts. And so maybe the way to deal with that is just defer the late fees or something like that. I think if you eliminate them, that might be an impairment of contract.
Okay, very good. And Mr. Chair, Kevin, thank you. I know we have to finish this hard stop. So Mr. Chair, if you want to conclude, I suggest we lay this over and we'll get back to people on a upcoming meeting. It might be shorter than a 3-day notice, but it'll be this topic. Otherwise it might be Monday. So.
I think that's a great suggestion. Let's lay this bill over for now. And at the chair's convenience and at the appropriate notice, we will meet again here shortly. So thank you, everybody, for the accommodations that you've made to be here today. It's great to see everybody and get this bill hammered out. So thank you, Senator Westrom, Chair Westrom, and others. And we will be in touch. And I imagine you'll see that notice from Joel. So have a great evening, and we will see you again soon.